T9C got the fucking juice.
Silver's the new gold.
Chris is shit fun.
T9C got the fucking juice.
Silver's the new gold.
Chris is shit fun.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of JT Sports Live. I'm your host, JT. We are only 4 weekends away from football being officially back. The NFL Hall of Fame game, I believe, is the first day of August, if I'm not mistaken. And I know to a lot of you folks out there, preseason football, you really don't pay too much attention to it. But for me, that's the start of when football season begins. I don't care if it's preseason, training camp. Listen, we are only a few weeks away from football officially being back. The NFL and college football have the longest off season out of any sports league. I would love if college football had something like a spring league where they played their spring games in exhibition style against other teams and they would televise them. But nonetheless, we got a really good show on deck that's going to really capture the heart of this off season. It's Super Bowl or bust going into this year for Lamar and the Ravens. Anthony Richardson, there's been a lot of hype around him going into year 2 for Indianapolis. There's been a lot of comparisons of him to Cam Newton, and some people believe that he could be in for a similar season to what Cam Newton had his MVP year in 2015. But to be honest with you, I'm not as high on Anthony Richardson as most people. That doesn't mean that I think he's going to be garbage, but I just think we need to hold up on the Anthony Richardson hype train. The New Orleans Saints have a new coach on their staff this year that's going to have a massive impact in determining how good they're going to be this season and if Dennis Allen is going to stick around for next year. The Cleveland Browns, how good are they going to be? Could they win the Super Bowl? I think they potentially could, but they also could be a 7-10 team this year. Miami, has some major trust issues when it comes to their coaching staff this year. Despite how talented the Canes may be heading into this year, a lot of fans are not convinced when it comes to Mario Cristobal being good enough for this team to live up to expectations. Is Miami in for another disappointing season due to lackluster coaching? I got some thoughts on the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry this year. And there is a dark horse contender that I have in mind for making the college football playoffs this season. I'm going to reveal that later on in the show. But before we begin, shout out to everybody in the chat. Shout out to my guy, Kate Roan, with the $9.99 donation. He says, woohoo, powerful JT Sports Live is back. Shout out to Kate Roan for supporting the channel. Shout out to everybody that's tuned in to this afternoon's live stream. Remember that we're not just a YouTube channel. We are a podcast. You can find the audio episode and all of our previous ones on all podcasting platforms, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcasts from. The JT Sports Podcast is available. If you enjoy, give us a 5-star review. If you're listening on YouTube, make sure to follow us on Instagram at JT Sports _ and on X at JT Sports __. If you're listening on X, follow, retweet the stream, comment your thoughts. And let's get into it, man. The New Orleans Saints have a new offensive coordinator this year, and how successful he is this season is going to have large implications on how far New Orleans goes this year. Could they be a playoff team? They most definitely can if this hire works out. But if it doesn't work out, then they could be just as bad as what a lot of us think, which is more so around the realm of 6 to 7 wins this year. They have the son of Gary Kubiak, Clint Kubiak, taking over from Pete Carmichael as their new offensive coordinator going into this season. Now, Gary Kubiak was a former Super Bowl winning head coach with the Denver Broncos in 2015, and Clint Kubiak, being his son, he has a lot of familiarity with the kind of system that his dad ran. It was run first, a lot of focus on getting the play action passing game going. And with Clint Kubiak, you're getting somebody who has 11 years of coaching in the NFL with various roles that he has served in the past for the 49ers, the Vikings, and the Broncos, specializing in the passing game and as a quarterback's coach. And this is going to be his second go-around being an offensive coordinator in the NFL. The last time Clint Kubiak called plays was in 2021 with the Minnesota Vikings, and the offense was pretty solid from a statistical standpoint. They were 12th in yards per game, 11th in passing yards per game. That same season, Kirk Cousins had one of the more efficient seasons of his career under Clint Kubiak's tutelage. He had 33 touchdowns to only 7 interceptions. They were 17th in rushing yards per game allowed. They were 14th in points per game. But his downfall was that they weren't good in third down situations. They only converted on third downs like 33%, 36% of the time that season, which was 26 in the league. So going into 2024 for New Orleans, how successful Clint Kubiak is going to be at calling plays for your offense is going to have a massive impact on how good you're going to be this season. Last year, the offense was too conservative. We didn't really see Derek Carr take a lot of shots downfield. It was a lot of dink and dunk, check downs, get the ball out fast. Under Clint Kubiak calling the plays, we should see more shots taken in the vertical passing game. New Orleans does have a pretty good wide receiving core. We know Chris Olave is one of the best deep threats in the game. You got Raheem Shaheed, who is pretty solid. Okay, Alvin Kamara, Jamal Williams are one of the better 1-2 punches in the NFL, but we saw Alvin Kamara kind of have a little bit of a down season. You know, he missed some time due to off the field issues, but when he came back, he still wasn't as good as what we seen him be in previous years. And then you got Jamal Williams, who you went out and got in free agency last year, who had a monster year the year prior with the Detroit Lions. We didn't really hear his name called that much. So with Clint Kubiak, you're hoping that Alvin Kamara, Jamal Williams carry the bulk load of your offense, and you don't have to rely too much on Derek Carr having to do damage with his arm. Although Derek Carr is still a decent quarterback, in my opinion. Is he a good quarterback? No, he's not, but I definitely think he's in the middle range of upper launch quarterback or upper echelon quarterbacks in the league. I would rank him as like a top 16, top 18 quarterback, which is still good enough for the Saints to win a pretty poor division that doesn't really have a lot of great teams in it. So with Clint Kubiak, what can you expect from his offense if you're a Saints fan? Well, we already know that he's going to implement a run-first, pass-action, heavy style offense, but it's going to be quarterback friendly, so it's going to be easy for Derek Carr to learn and understand the terminology. But there's going to be a wrinkle into this offense that we didn't really see a lot under Pete Carmichael. And that is that the Saints are going to use a lot of motion. There's going to be a lot of outside wide zone runs. And with Clint Kubiak coming from that Kyle Shanahan tree, although he has spent a year working with Kyle Shanahan, you're hoping that a little bit of that Shanahan influence trickles down to Kubiak and what he wants to do offensively in terms of calling the plays and how he's going to set these defenses up. But you also have to remember that Kubiak's dad spent a lot of time working with Kyle Shanahan's dad, Mike Shanahan. So it's fair to assume that there already is a good amount of that Shanahan influence into what Clint Kubiak is going to be calling offensively for the Saints this year. And Clint Kubiak is going to decide the fate of not only New Orleans this year, but also Dennis Allen's future. We know that the Saints are going to have a good defense this year. At worst, they'll be a top 14 unit. But if the offense ends up working out with this hire of Clint Kubiak, then you most definitely can expect to see Dennis Allen around for the next couple of years, because that means that the Saints should be a playoff team and potentially they could win the NFC South. But if this hire backfires, New Orleans not only is going to miss the playoffs, but they're going to have a losing record, and it's going to be the end of the Dennis Allen era, short-lived with the New Orleans Saints franchise. So there is a lot riding on Clint Kubiak this year. I look at the Saints similarly to how the Buccaneers were viewed last year. Remember around this time last offseason, most of us thought that the Bucs were going to be picking in the top 3, top 5 of the draft, but they ended up exceeding expectations. That was mostly due to part of Dave Canales, who they brought over from Seattle. He ended up being the OC for the first time in his coaching career. He resurrected Baker Mayfield's career, and he now currently is the head coach of the Carolina Panthers. If it wasn't for Dave Canales, there's a good chance that we might not have seen the Bucs make it to the postseason last year, and Todd Bowles probably could have been fired. I look at this Clint Kubiak pairing with New Orleans, down with Dennis Allen, similarly to when Todd Bowles hired Dave Canales. If it works out, New Orleans could win the NFC South this year. They most definitely can be a playoff team. But if it fails, everybody's going to be SOL, and it's going to be back to the drawing board for New Orleans and Mickey Loomis when it comes to finding their next head coach. And hell, who knows, even Mickey Loomis may end up getting the boot. Despite how good of a job he does as a general manager, his job isn't safe depending on how the Saints look on the field this year. So the most important coach on the Saints staff that you need to remember, not named Dennis Allen, is Clint Kubiak. If the offense ends up struggling again, the name who you guys need to be going at on Twitter is Clint Kubiak. Remember that. But if the Saints end up having an explosive offense this year, you're probably going to hear this guy's name brought up a bunch when it comes to available head coaching jobs at the end of this season. Shout out to everybody in the chat, man. Shout out to my guy Who That Dude and Me. Shout out to Kate Roan. He says, would love to see Kamara and Jamal Williams have a big comeback season. They're both outstanding. Shout out to everybody that's tuned in to the stream. Shout out to everybody on X, everybody on YouTube. Okay. For the Baltimore Ravens going into this season, it seems like it's now or never in terms of them being able to win a Super Bowl. Lamar Jackson is 27 years old, and he probably has about 3 to 4 years left of high-level peak performance before we start to see him fall off a little bit. And within these next couple of years, you got to ask yourself, when are the Ravens going to be able to win with Lamar playing at his full capability? They still have the most talented team in the AFC going into this year. They got a stacked offense. You got Zay Flowers going into year 2. You're going to have a healthy Mark Andrews. Your defense is still stacked at every level, every position. Yeah, you have some new faces that are going to be on the offensive line. You're going to be replacing some older players that you lost. But for the most part, this is still one of the most complete teams in the National Football League. And with the addition of Derrick Henry, he could be the missing piece for the Baltimore Ravens being able to get over the hump. Why did they come up short against Kansas City last year? Well, I think the number one reason for that was because they only ran the ball 6 times with their running backs, which is something that I strongly doubt happens when you got that behemoth in the backfield behind Lamar and King Henry. Another thing is that I felt in that conference championship loss, Baltimore was too reliant on Lamar Jackson. Now, we know how good Lamar is, but you got to be balanced, okay? And you don't need to be a dominant rushing team to be able to have success on the ground. You just need to be able to run the football when you want to. And that's what the Ravens are going to be able to do with Derrick Henry. With Derrick Henry, he's going to make defenses readjust the way they defend against Lamar. Because for a while, yeah, we know that the Ravens have always been pretty good when it comes to having decent running back play. But they've never had an RB as talented as what Derrick Henry is. And with him being in the backfield, defenses are going to have to pick their poison. You're either going to game plan to go all in on stopping Lamar, and then you got to get worried about getting killed up the middle of your D by Derrick Henry, or you can key in on trying to stop Derrick Henry, but you have to worry about the speed of Lamar Jackson, breaking contain outside, and then eventually, ruining how you want to run your defenses when it comes to keeping Lamar Jackson contained as a runner. Because the thing that I've heard a lot of defensive coordinators talk about when it comes to defending Lamar Jackson is you don't want this dude to get outside contained or to break outside contained and get along the edges, because that's when you get in trouble. Well, how are you going to stop Lamar from getting outside if you got to worry about trying to stop Derrick Henry from bullying your defense up the middle? Having Derrick Henry just brings a different amount of pressure for opposing defenses that they haven't had in the past when it's just been all Lamar Jackson. You got King Henry and LJ in the same backfield. I don't know what defense you're going to be able to run to be able to slow this offense down when you also have to couple in the ability to throw the football at a really high level as well. Derrick Henry could be the missing piece to what gets Baltimore back into the Super Bowl, something that we haven't seen them in since 2012, when they beat the 49ers and it was the Harbaugh Brother Bowl. It's now or never, Super Bowl or bust, whatever you want to call it for the Baltimore Ravens this year, because if they can't win the Super Bowl, I don't know when they ever will. Derrick Henry is at the peak of age for running backs who end up starting to fall off right after. He's flat at 30. After this season, at 31, we probably start to see a big amount of a regression. And it was similar to when the Ravens had Mark Ingram, which was when Lamar Jackson was coming into year 2, and he won MVP that year. We saw how big of an impact Mark Ingram had on Lamar Jackson as an overall player. When you have a dynamic running back behind LJ, it makes him even more harder to defend. So I'm looking at this move by Baltimore, bringing in Derrick Henry, as another reason to believe that they're going all in on trying to win the championship this year. You got to strike while the iron's hot. Lamar Jackson still has a couple of years remaining on his deal before he's up for another big-time extension, and he only has a few years left of high-level QB play before he starts to regress. If you're Baltimore, your window to win the Super Bowl is either this year or the following season, depending on if Derrick Henry can still give you high-caliber running back play, which I think is fair to say that this season is probably the last we're going to see of King Henry actually living up to that name before we start to see some big regression and you start to say, okay, he needs to hang it up. If Baltimore can't win it this year, I strongly am going to question if Lamar's ever going to be able to win it. Todd Monken is returning for year 2 as the Ravens offensive coordinator. Lamar Jackson is going to be able to have some more familiarity. Todd Monken is going to be able to open things up a lot more. You know, last year was just all about finding out the way to maximize Lamar Jackson's strengths and finding a way to get him comfortable in the new offense, and the new offense that really was new to Baltimore. Baltimore was never really throwing the football as what they were at that high of a level last season and years past, and they never were known as a team that came off as pass heavy. And even though they were throwing the football at a high rate with a lot of success, they still led the NFL in rushing yards per game last year, or they at least were top 3 in that department. So you still have to get back to what the fundamentals are of your offense, which is running the football, being physical up front. But with Todd Monken having another added year with Lamar, you definitely can expect some more wrinkles out of this offense that we didn't see in 2023. It's a Super Bowl or bust kind of year for the Baltimore Ravens. And it kind of, in my opinion, is that every single year when you get Lamar Jackson fully healthy come playoff time, Lamar Jackson has the second best win-loss record in the NFL behind Patrick Mahomes. So when this dude is healthy, the Ravens are always in contention to not just get the 1 seed in the AFC, but to win a championship as long as you can keep him fully healthy. If Lamar Jackson doesn't suffer any setbacks this season, the Ravens are going to be there along with Kansas City, Buffalo, and whoever else to hoist that Lombardi trophy. But can they get over the hump if they have to play a Patrick Mahomes again? I believe that they can. It really just comes down to being able to execute in big moments in the fourth quarter if you're Lamar Jackson, and not forgetting to run the damn football if you're Todd Monken. Okay. The expectations for Anthony Richardson this season are through the roof. You got many people who believe that he could be in for a similar season as to what Cam Newton had in 2015 with the Carolina Panthers when he took home league MVP that year. And Anthony Richardson, for me, I think he's going to have a really good season, but I'm not as high on him as what a lot of people are who are hyping up the Anthony Richardson hype train. To me, he slowly has become a little bit overhyped because we seem to forget what was the biggest knock on him when he was coming out of last year's draft, which was his lack of experience. Now, every game that Anthony Richardson seemed to play in last year, he seemed to get better. But there was still some things that he needed to clean up that were only going to come with experience and repetition. But we didn't get to see Anthony Richardson get the needed experience and reps that he needed because he got injured within the first 4 to 5 games of last year. So you still have a quarterback going into year 2 that still is fairly raw. His footwork still needs to improve. He only completed 56.7% of his passes when he was throwing from within a clean pocket. His D-ball accuracy still needs a lot of work. Anthony Richardson is far from a finished product. And I don't want this to sound like I'm hating on Anthony Richardson, which I'm not. What I'm telling you is that what you're going to see out of AR this year is a lot of flash in the pan. He's going to have some games when he goes off 24 or 31 passing, 275 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, and no interceptions. But you're also going to see some moments where Anthony Richardson shows signs that he still has some ways to go as far as being an elite starting quarterback in the NFL, where he may throw for 170 yards, complete 11 of 25 passing for maybe 1 touchdown and 3 interceptions. You're going to see a roller coaster ride out of Anthony Richardson in year 2, because the questions that we had about him from his rookie season still have not been answered. Do we know completely that he's going to be able to live up to his potential? Yes, we know that he is being coached by one of the better offensive minds in the league, but we still have a lot that we need to see out of this man before we should start anointing him as a future MVP winner. Because although he isn't top 10 in MVP odds, he still has been a hot bet on the MVP market. In fantasy football, I've seen him go as high as QB 8, QB 7. I love Anthony Richardson. I think that he has insane upside, but we seem to forget that he still is far from a finished product. And I'm not finna say that he's going to be as good as what 2015 Cam Newton was, when that MVP year out of Cam was something different. He carried Carolina on his back, with Ted Ginn being his number 1 wide receiver, not really having a great supporting cast. He really was Superman that year. To put that kind of expectation on Anthony Richardson, who still needs way more polishing, I think it's a little bit unfair for him. And that's how you set these quarterbacks up for a make or break year 3 when it really shouldn't be. Anthony Richardson, his first 2 years in the league should be viewed as developmental years. I'm not viewing Anthony Richardson as a legitimate MVP candidate until next year. I think 2025 is going to be the year that we see AR put it all together. But for right now, I think that we should slow down on the Anthony Richardson hype train, especially if you're playing fantasy football and you're trying to find a good fantasy quarterback. Yes, the rushing numbers are going to be there, but you're going to have some games where you roll with Anthony Richardson as your QB1. He may go off, and he may also stink it up and lose you that week in fantasy. So we should just slow down before we try to anoint Anthony Richardson as being this Cam Newton clone, but hyped up to 100% capacity. When you look at the athleticism that he has, he's 6'4", 244, 255 pounds, running 4.43. This dude is a freakish athlete. Nobody's denying that. But it takes more to win at the NFL level than just being a great athlete. I'm not saying that Anthony Richardson can't throw the football. All I'm saying is that he hasn't showed us yet that he has the ability to be a consistent passer. He still completed under 60% of his throws last year. All right, the accuracy still was a problem his rookie season. Although he was a lot better than what most expected, he still has some ways to go. And even with Josh Allen, he made a big leap his second year, but he was nowhere close to being the quarterback that he is now in year 2 of Buffalo. What we should be looking for out of Anthony Richardson in 2024 is growth and maturity as a passer. Not expecting this man to have a Cam Newton-esque season or to put up MVP numbers, although that's what you would love to see. But I just don't want it where he doesn't end up living up to this MVP hype, or he doesn't be as good as what the fantasy football community believes he can, and then people start souring over Anthony Richardson going into year 3. When we knew when Indianapolis drafted this dude last year that it was going to take at least 2 years for this dude to start playing at a really high level. He wasn't a CJ Stroud kind of prospect coming out of Florida. He was somebody that if you drafted, you knew it was going to take some time for him to figure it out. I'm not riding the Anthony Richardson hype train as much as what a lot of people in the national media are trying to say. He's a dark horse MVP candidate. He's going to put up 2015 Cam Newton numbers. Let's just hold back on that until at least 2025. I'm not hating on Anthony Richardson. Don't try to call me a hater all because I'm saying let's just have some more modest expectations for him, considering the fact that he still is very inexperienced and needs more reps to get better. That's all I'm saying. If you call me a hater in the comment section, I promise to God, I might block you off my channel. Because that means that you didn't listen to a damn thing that I just said for the last 4 to 5 minutes. Let's just hold up on the Anthony Richardson MVP hype. Let's hold up on trying to anoint him the next Cam Newton. Let's wait until year 3 where he has a full season of being fully healthy under his belt to then assess his MVP chances. I'm not willing to bet on him being an MVP candidate in 2024 this year. I'm just not. I just need to see more consistency out of him, and we didn't see that year 1 in Indy. Shout out to everybody in the chat, man. Shout out to my guy, M. Sparks. He says, no, all the above. I'm a Steelers fan. I go to Baltimore every year. Hate their fans, too. Kate Rowan says, yeah, I see now that was a stupid question as there's been much talk of the Steelers and Wilson as the QB madness. And Spark says, hope Richardson is not injury prone and he can succeed in the NFL. Me too, man. Like, Anthony Richardson was definitely one of my favorite prospects coming out. I got a homeboy that's really close with Anthony Richardson. He's a hard worker. I believe he's going to succeed, but this season, I don't think he's going to be as good as what a lot of people think he will be. I still think there's going to be a lot of inconsistency there with his level of play. There's going to be some highs, there's going to be some lows, and there's going to be some really ugly games. But for the most part, I'm still viewing year 2 for Anthony Richardson in the league as a developmental year for him. I'm not really putting a lot of stock into him having a MVP caliber season or being 2015 Cam Newton. If you are enjoying this episode and you haven't already, make sure that you give us a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify. Remember that we're not just a YouTube channel, we are a podcast. Every episode, including this one, is available in audio format wherever you get your podcast from. Apple, Spotify, Amazon. You can find the JT Sports Podcast on all podcasting platforms. Give us a 5-star review if you enjoy. Follow us on Instagram at JT Sports _ and on X at JT Sports __. If you have a question that you would like featured on a future episode, you can send them in the DMs and I will potentially get to it and answer it in a mailbag episode. So go ahead and give us a follow on those platforms. Now, if you guys hear like any rumbling in the background or some weird noises, it's thundering outside. I guess we're about to have a thunderstorm. I live in Florida, so the weather around here is really bipolar. Before I went live, it was sunny outside, and now all of a sudden it's cloudy, it's dark. So if you hear some rumbling or some rumbling, bumbling, stumbling in the background, that's what all the commotion is. Let's move on. Let's talk about this before we move on to college football. The Cleveland Browns this year, believe it or not, are good enough to win the Super Bowl this year, but they also could be bad enough where they only win 6 or 7 games this season. How good the Cleveland Browns are this year is largely going to hinge on the play of Deshaun Watson. And Deshaun Watson has to be the biggest mystery in the NFL right now because we don't know if this dude is garbage now or if he's no better than an above average quarterback or if he's going to be able to revert back to the form that we saw him play at with the Houston Texans. Because when he was with the Texans, he was pretty much a top 7, top 6 quarterback in the game. And we haven't seen a fall off this big at the quarterback position in a very long time. If Deshaun Watson remembers how to be an elite quarterback this year, there's no way you can't tell me the Cleveland Browns not only can win the AFC North, with how good that defense is. They are fully healthy on the offensive line. You got good receivers. You're going to have Nick Chubb fully healthy eventually. You got Jerome Ford, who had a really good season last year. If Deshaun Watson plays at an elite level with what Cleveland has around him on both sides of the ball, this is a Super Bowl contender. Okay, and they're good enough to beat any team in the AFC North. And if Deshaun Watson plays at an elite level, that means that the Steelers most likely are going to be the worst team in the AFC North, and the Browns could be good enough to, bump down Cincinnati because they're not as good as what Cleveland is up front. And the Baltimore Ravens in Cleveland, they pretty much could be jousting for first place in the North. I could see the Browns winning it if we see great QB play out of Deshaun. And it would be the second year in a row the Cleveland Browns have gotten a storybook kind of season out of their quarterbacks, because last year we saw Joe Flacco win comeback player of the year when he came off the couch and played at a surprisingly good level. Imagine if Deshaun Watson ends up reverting back to the Houston Texans form that the Browns envisioned getting when they first acquired him in that trade. And you got to remember, the question for the Browns at this point is, can you ever get good quarterback play? Because they went from being a team that was the worst in the NFL, looking for a quarterback, to now being in a situation where they need a good quarterback to put themselves in that Super Bowl conversation. And if Deshaun Watson bounces back this year, they definitely can be in that convo. But if he still plays the way that we've seen him play for Cleveland since he got traded there, it's wrapped for them, and they're not going to be anything better than an 8-win team at best. Because we know that Jim Schwartz's defense is going to show up. We know that he's going to have a top 10 defense. They're going to be aggressive. They're going to be good at forcing turnovers. They can get after the quarterback. They're going to give Cleveland's offense every opportunity to put some points on the board. But if you're getting below average, mediocre QB play, then your defense has to do all the work, and you put them at a disadvantage because they're going to be on the field for more snaps than what they need to be. For Deshaun, there isn't a quarterback this season that has more pressure than what he does. And that's even more than Daniel Jones. You got to remember how much this brother's getting paid. $250 million fully guaranteed. He may be the reason why we never see another black quarterback get that much fully guaranteed money ever again. Not trying to be racist, just keeping the buck with you. He got traded to Cleveland and forgot how to be a good quarterback. There is so much riding on Deshaun Watson, because when he got traded to Cleveland, they replaced him. He was supposed to be the replacement for Baker Mayfield. And Baker Mayfield, ever since, has been better than what Deshaun has been. Last year, we saw Baker Mayfield outplay Deshaun Watson by a landslide when Deshaun Watson was supposed to be the missing piece to Cleveland getting over the hump. And at this point, it looks like they were wrong to move on from Baker, because if they would have stuck it out with Baker, they possibly could have been a lot closer to winning a championship than what they are now with the big mystery that is Deshaun Watson. So how good are the Cleveland Browns going to be this year? Really, the question should be, how good is Deshaun Watson going to be this year? Because he's going to be the answer to that question. They say football is a team sport, and that is true. But the quarterback position has the biggest impact on determining the wins and losses than any other position on the field. And with how good the Cleveland Browns are this season, they are a great quarterback away from being able to compete for it all. And if Deshaun Watson ends up looking like what we saw with Houston, you better watch out if your team plays the Cleveland Browns this year. But if we see that garbage that we saw out of him last year and the year before that, it's wraps for Cleveland, and you can lock them in as a sure thing to miss out on the postseason. And it's a shame, because Kevin Stefanski is probably the most underrated head coach in the NFL right now. If you ask me, the Browns should give this dude a lifelong contract as their head coach, because he is by far the best head coach that they've ever had in the history of their franchise. And if you want to go back to the Otto Graham years all you want to, you can go ahead and do that. But as far as my memory serves me correctly, since I've been watching football from 2008 to this point on, I haven't seen the coach look as good as what Kevin Stefanski has in Cleveland. And I think that he can end up getting a good amount of juice out of Deshaun. I just don't believe that we can see him playing at elite level again. At best, we will get above average quarterback play out of Deshaun if everything works out, because I just think that Deshaun Watson at this point, he is what he is. He's a mid-level quarterback. He's not what he was with the Houston Texans. But at the same time, I'm still not going to overlook the possibility of Deshaun Watson being able to bounce back to form. I still would like to believe that there's still a lot left in the tank for Deshaun. And if he doesn't end up shaking back this season, then the Cleveland Browns, man, they got scammed in the worst way possible. Now, I've told you guys all off season that this is the year to drink the Miami Start that over. I've told you guys all this offseason that this is the year to be sipping on the Miami Hurricanes Kool-Aid. If there was ever a year for the Hurricanes to make it to the ACC championship and to win that thing and get into the college football playoffs, it's this year. However, though, there are a lot of concerns that many college football fans have when it comes to putting faith that Miami can actually live up to the hype and they can win this conference because of the head coach being Mario Cristobal. Now, Mario Cristobal has a reputation of being a fantastic recruiter, a really good program builder, but once he gets your program to a certain point, you peak under him because his in-game decision-making, his clock management is really poor. He's a great recruiter, great culture builder, but he sucks when it comes to the on-the-field portion of being a coach. And we saw last year that abomination late against Georgia Tech. That's inexcusable. And Mario Cristobal has taken all the accountability in the world for that mishap, as he should. But he also has made a lot of changes to his philosophy that a lot of people aren't talking about. This used to be somebody who was old school, smash mouth football, pro style offense, get your quarterback underneath center, run the football as many times as possible, only throw it when need be, to now having an offensive coordinator in Shannon Dawson who runs an air raid style offense. Mario Cristobal has shown the ability to build a really good coaching staff. You got a really good DC. You got a really good OC. And I don't think that his in-game decision-making is as bad as what fans make it out to be. When if you look at the previous two stops that he's been at before he's come down to South Florida, FIU, he was pretty good there. And now Oregon, he had a 12-win season in 2019 when the Ducks won the Pac-12 title and they went to the Rose Bowl and won it. He went 10-3 his final season down there in Eugene. He had, a win against Ohio State his final season up there, which was a big win for him, by the way, because he went on the road and beat the Buckeyes, which is not an easy feat. A lot of teams cannot beat Ohio State when you have to play them on the road. And then his previous two seasons at Miami, it's been steady improvement. 5-7 year one, 7-6 in year two. And you could make the argument that if that Georgia Tech game ends the way that it should have ended with Miami taking the knee, they possibly could have been an 8-win team, maybe a 9-win team if a couple of other games would have bounced in their favor. And year three is normally when Mario Cristobal's teams start to have big years. That's when you start to see all the effort that he's been putting in on the recruiting trail start to pay off. I get that there are trust issues with Mario Cristobal based on the mishaps that he's had in the past, but those are just some small moments overriding somebody who has a pretty good track record of being able to deliver everywhere he's been. Is Miami going to be undefeated this season? No, they're not. I guarantee that they possibly could lose 2 games. Just because, with Mario Cristobal, you do have a team that plays down the competition occasionally. And there may be some games that they should be able to win that they end up losing. That's what you get out of Mario Cristobal as your head coach. But that doesn't mean that there's no reason to trust him. Okay, there's only a handful of coaches right now in this sport that any team they play that they're better than, they should win those games. Upsets happen all the time. But if you look at the broader spectrum of the ACC this year, you're playing a Florida State team that has to rebuild. They are incredibly overrated. Regardless of how good of a coach Mike Norvell is, you mean to tell me that you trust DJ Uiagalelei throwing the ball late in the fourth quarter over a really talented Hurricanes defense? You mean to tell me that you trust DJU more than you trust Cam Ward? Mario Cristobal has shown that during his time in Oregon, if you give him a talented team, he can deliver on expectations. Now, up there in Oregon, they were supposed to be a playoff team, which is something that they never achieved under his time being head coach there. But at Miami, though, with the talent that he has, we're not expecting this team to win it all. All we are expecting as Hurricane fans is that you win this damn conference, which you should be able to do because you have the best team in this thing by a wide margin. And plus, you got the best quarterback. You got Damian Martinez. You got a team that you pretty much have bought from the portal, plus mixed in with some really fantastic recruiting. The talent is there for Miami to win this conference. This is the most talented Hurricanes team that we've ever seen in recent history. It's been a while since you can look at the talent that Miami has this year and rival that to what Miami had back in 2002. And I know it seems like Miami fans say that every single year, but this really is a damn good team. And anything less than a 10-win season is a major disappointment. But I believe in Mario Cristobal. He's viewed as a program builder. He may not be the greatest on-field coach, but based on what he has done at Oregon, a 10-win season 2021, a 12-win season Pac-12 title in 2019, that includes being able to beat Kyle Whittingham and that really well-coached Utah squad. He also has gone on the road and beaten Ohio State. For all of the mishaps Mario Cristobal has had, there's also been a lot of big moments that he's had in the past that have shown you that he has the ability to deliver on high expectations. The over-under win total being 9.5 for Miami this year, I think is easy money if you go ahead and you take the over. But if you want to lose money easily, then you can go ahead and take the under and live in this BS narrative that history defines what you're going to be for the foreseeable future. The same people telling you that you can't trust Mario Cristobal were the same people that thought FSU needed to fire Mike Norvell going into last season. You remember what they said about Florida State? That was a make or break season too, right? Florida State would never get back to the level that they were. But yet, they got robbed out of making it into the playoffs, and they won the ACC going undefeated. How about Texas last year? The same thing that people say about Miami every year. Oh, they'll never be back. Oh, you can't trust Mario Cristobal. What's the same thing they were saying about Steve Sarkisian and the Longhorns last season around this time. You can't judge programs based off history. With how good Mario Cristobal has been at stops like FIU and Oregon, being able to win some marquee matchups, beating Ohio State, winning a Pac-12 title, that gives me reasons to believe that he can do this in Miami. The ACC is not tough this year. There is no team in this conference that's as talented as what Miami is. And I would live and die off that statement. Is he going to have a few losses that he shouldn't have? I definitely can see one or two of them, but he's going to win the games that he needs to win. He's going to beat Florida week 1. He's going to beat Florida State. And with those 2 wins, I think Miami should be good for a 10-win season. Where all the other losses come from is up to discussion. Maybe they drop a game to Virginia Tech or somebody like that. But a 10-win season for Miami is good enough to get them the ACC title and the spot in the new expanded playoffs. I get why people don't trust Mario Cristobal, but at the same time, I think that the lack of trust stems from misconceptions about this dude not being able to win big games when we've seen in the past him be able to win big games and deliver on expectations. And we seem to overlook this dude's resume. We act like he's Billy Napier. There's people that will tell you that Billy Napier and Mario Cristobal are the same coach when they're not. One has actually won a Power 5 title, and one has been unable to win at this level, now being Power 4. Billy Napier hasn't shown anything in Florida to believe that he has that program heading in the right direction. At least from an on-the-field standpoint, at least Mario Cristobal has given you a Pac-12 title, a Rose Bowl win, and multiple double-digit winning seasons. We haven't seen that out of Billy Napier. So I trust Mario Cristobal, and I believe for the people who have a hard time believing in the hype with Miami, you can trust Mario Cristobal to at least get this team to 10 wins in that ACC championship game. I trust him way more than I trust DJ Uiagalelei. Do you trust him? I don't give a damn how good of a coach Mike Norvell is. You put DJ Uiagalelei at quarterback, I can't trust you, bro, because I don't think you're serious. Literally, this dude is the most overrated quarterback in the history of college football that I've ever seen, bro. People ride DJ U's dick too much for me after what we've seen him done at Clemson and Oregon State. I trust Mario way more than I trust whatever FSU has down there. And I'm not being biased. I'm just keeping it real. I think that the lack of trust when it comes to Mario is rooted in people overlooking what this dude has accomplished throughout his career being a head coach in college football. Shout out to everybody in the chat, man. My guy N Spark says, I used to live in South Florida. I'm cool with the Canes, but Pitt number one first. Kate Rowan says, did you like Pickett at all when he was at Pitt, or just a disappointment? Man, I never liked Kenny Pickett. I never saw the hype with him. You guys can go to my shorts, and I had my live reaction to the Steelers drafting Kenny Pickett. I was like, ew, like we really drafted Kenny Pickett? I was never a fan of this dude. We got some more college football to talk about. Michigan has gotten their way with Ohio State in this rivalry the last couple of years. Is Ohio State going to make it a fourth straight year that they get owned by Michigan? To me, if I'm being honest with you guys, there's no reason why Ohio State should lose to Michigan this year. And I think this season, the Buckeyes are going to remind everybody why recruiting and having talent in college football matters so much. You see, what Michigan fans keep bragging about is how, man, we've been able to dominate the Big Ten and make it to the playoffs the last couple of years despite not being able to recruit as good as Ohio State. We don't need to recruit well to win. We win the way that we play football, and that's all that we need, which is true and false in a sense. Yes, every team is able to win differently. Every program has their own kind of identity that they play into that helps them win. But eventually, with college football being built upon the back of recruiting, and the teams that normally win championships are the teams that have recruited well and have one of the better assembled rosters in the sport, it's going to come back to bite Michigan in the butt that they haven't been able to recruit at the elite level as compared to Ohio State. And with Ohio State this year pretty much being loaded at damn near every position, offensive line is stacked, quarterback is going to be really good, wide receiver, you're going to have a really good defensive line. With the coaching staff that Ohio State has in place, okay, you got Jim Knowles. We know he's one of the best DCs in America, but now you add Chip Kelly to that mix. You're going to have pretty much the best coaching staff in college football this year. Meanwhile, Michigan has a completely new coaching staff. Yeah, you got Sharon Moore, who had some experience briefly being a head coach and replacer Jim Harbaugh when he was serving that suspension last year. He did win some big games, but that doesn't mean that with Jim Harbaugh being gone, Michigan is going to pick up from where they left off last year. And there seems to be a lot of disrespect thrown at Ryan Day when we're acting like this dude doesn't have anything less than 10 losses on his resume. At worst, Ryan Day is going to give you a 10, 11 win season, and yet we're looking at him like he's just some garbage head coach and he's unable of being able to turn this rivalry around in Ohio State's favor again, when we seem to forget not too long ago, before Michigan started running this thing, Ohio State was running Michigan out the damn door in these rivalry matchups. I would never forget those Urban Meyer teams that were running through those Jim Harbaugh coached Michigan teams. What made Urban Meyer's era of Ohio State football so memorable as compared to Ryan Day? Well, the lack of physicality that Ohio State has had in this game has hurt them. Every time you see Michigan play these boys, it's always a mismatch up front. I don't care what the stats show. Ohio State just isn't able to match Michigan's level of intensity and toughness in the trenches, and that's where they lose and win these games. However, this season, though, the tables are going to turn. With Chip Kelly, what has he done his last couple of years at UCLA? He went from being known as a finesse coach back at Oregon to being a coach that put a lot of emphasis on being good up front and being able to establish a toughness on the ground. You got Travion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins. This is the best running back core maybe in recent memory. When's the last time we've seen a team in college football have this good of a 1-2 punch out running back? I think the way they're going to rotate Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson is that every game they're going to alternate between being the starting running back, and they're going to alternate between series. One series, Travion Henderson is going to get the bulk load of the touches. The next series, Quinshon Judkins is going to get the bulk load of the touches. With having Chip Kelly reunite with his former offensive line coach, you're going to see an offense that's going to be able to match the toughness that Michigan has had in this game the last couple of years. And I eventually would like to believe that recruiting matters so much in college football when you got these programs spending so much money on it. They're buying these recruits Lambos. They're flying them out on private jets for recruiting visits. You mean to tell me that Michigan can continue to sustain their style of winning without being able to recruit at the level that Ohio State does? Bullshit. Eventually, Ohio State's ability to recruit better than Michigan is going to show. Ohio State is recruiting at pretty much a top 5 level consistently every single year. Their recruiting under Ryan Day has been miles better than what it ever was under Urban Meyer. Recruiting matters in college football, and you cannot ignore that. Michigan is replacing nearly their whole entire team from last year, plus their head coach in Jim Harbaugh. You mean to tell me that Sharon Moore is going to pick up from where the best head coach in Michigan's program history left off? I have a hard time seeing that. This year, Ohio State is about to give Michigan and their fan base a big reality check this year. And I don't have anything against Michigan fans. I love all you Michigan fans that are subscribed to the channel. You feel me? But let's not act like this fan base hasn't become a little bit obnoxious over the last couple of years, man. Like, I'm trying to keep my bias out of this, but I'll be lying to you if I tell you that I wouldn't be happier than seeing Ohio State knock these boys off. Really, I mean, it really made me feel some kind of way when you have Michigan fans trying to victimize themselves, talking about it's Michigan versus everybody. When you cheated, bro. Nobody's against you. You caused that by cheating, bro. You never should have had Connor Stallions videotaping those coaches when they were calling in the plays, man. You know that was against the rules. Even though everybody else is doing it, you were the one who got caught. Stop trying to make it seem like people had it out for you. You got caught cheating. You're getting what you deserve. I really hope that Ohio State humbles Michigan in this fan base, bro, because this has easily become the most intolerable fan base in college football, bro. Like, they're victimizing themselves. They make it seem like you can still be a national championship contender without recruiting at a high level. You're not Georgia. You're not. You are not in a position where you simply just reload and you just don't have to rebuild. Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, they can do that. They don't have to rebuild. They can reload on talent because of how well they recruit. You don't. And this season, I really believe that Ohio State is going to expose the glaring weakness that Michigan's football program has had, which is their lack of ability to recruit at elite level. I'm not about to call Michigan some juggernaut program just because they beat up on the Big Ten the last couple of years. They need to prove to us that they can be able to recruit at the same level of Ohio State. Jim Harbaugh is the greatest head coach they've ever had. He's gone now. It's fair to believe that Ryan Day is going to end up running this game over Sharon Moore the next couple of years. The game is going to become a one-sided affair once again in the favor of Ohio State, because I don't think that Michigan has the talent to beat this year's Ohio State team. And Ohio State, where they've come up short at in this game, despite being the more talented team the last couple of times they played, is that Ohio State now is able to beat Michigan at their own game, which is they're going to be able to push them around, or they're going to be able to be just as physical as what Michigan has been against them the last couple of years. That's the one thing that Ohio State has lacked in this game that they are going to have going into this season. Keep thinking that Chip Kelly is this overrated offensive coordinator all you want to. The last thing you ever should allow to happen was Ohio State to hire Chip Kelly as their offensive play caller and to give him arguably the most talented offense in college football. Chip Kelly has the load of riches. The reason why his offenses at UCLA weren't that great was because they weren't always stacked with the necessary talent to be great. At Ohio State, this dude is going to be scheming guys wide open. He's going to have Will Howard playing like a legit Heisman contender this year. If I was a Michigan fan, I would be ready to prepare for our run of dominance over Ohio State in the Big Ten to end this season. Ohio State is going to give this Michigan fan base and that program a reality check that, hey, we need to recruit better. We need to step our game up if we want to sustain the level of play that we had under Jim Harbaugh. I love how these Michigan fans keep forgetting how Ohio State was easily running this rivalry every time they played before the last couple of years transpired. This is still a way more talented team than what Michigan is, especially going into this year with them not returning a lot of production. Having a new coaching staff in place, I love for Ohio State to give Michigan the beating that they so well deserve and to give them a reality check to put them back in their place, to remind them, hey, if you want to be able to compete with the big boys consistently, you got to be able to recruit better. Everybody has their style of winning in college football. That's what makes this sport so great. But you still have to be able to recruit at a high level if you want to be in the conversation to win a national title at the end of the year. One season of you not having a top 10 roster, winning a national championship, doesn't exclude all the previous years when teams that have recruited at a top 8 level or better have won a natty. Ohio State, though, they're about to remind us all why talent in college football and why recruiting effectively is important to establishing yourself as a consistent national championship contender. The last thing I want to talk about is this. I got a surprise team who could shock the whole entire world and make it into the college football playoffs this year. And I don't think anybody is bringing up this school when it comes to being a potential playoff team. But Virginia Tech, there is a lot of hype surrounding the Hokies this year for a really good reason. Brent Pry enters year 3, and he is a head coach who has shown a lot of promise his first couple of years with Virginia Tech. And he returns one of the nation's top teams in returning production. They returned 95% of their offensive production from last season. 77% of their production from last year returns in 2024. On offense, you're going to have good receivers, a good and experienced offensive line with some capable running backs. It all comes down to the play of Kyron Drones. If he ends up developing as a passer and he improves based on what we saw him do in 2023, he could be a dark horse Heisman contender. And in the ACC, possibly could see the Hokies win this conference before it eventually ends up going extinct in God knows how much time, right? And then you look at this defense. You got a great pass rush with some solid linebackers and secondary play. And you also have a very favorable schedule. The toughest games that Virginia Tech has to play this year is Rutgers at home, Miami on the road, and Clemson. And they could very well win all three of those games. Hell, Virginia Tech possibly could go 12-0 this season. That's how good this team is. Normally, when you have a head coach going into year 3 that returns this amount of experience and this much talent, normally they end up not only living up to expectations, but they also put themselves in a position to win their conference. Virginia Tech is one of those teams that not a lot of people are talking about in terms of teams that could greatly benefit from the playoffs expanding from 4 to 12. They could be the equivalent to what last year's Missouri was. Instead of being in the SEC, the toughest conference in college football, you got Missouri and probably the weakest power conference in college football in Virginia Tech this season. They profile exactly like how Missouri did in 2023. It all hinges on how good Kyron Drones improved as a quarterback this year. We know last year he was a military tank on the ground. He had 818 rushing yards, 5 touchdowns, was averaging nearly 5 yards per carry. But where Virginia Tech got in trouble last year and the games that they lost was when Kyron Drones completed less than 60% of his passes. But if he can improve his accuracy, his decision-making, and just becomes an overall more well-rounded quarterback, there's a path for Virginia Tech getting into the college football playoffs this year. And I definitely think there's a really strong chance that it happens. I could see Virginia Tech this season finishing in second place in the ACC, right behind Miami, ahead of Florida State. There's more reasons to be confident about Virginia Tech this season than there is to be confident about Florida State. People are only believing in Florida State because of what they did last year. They're living in the recency bias, and they're not judging these teams based on what they have coming into this season. Virginia Tech is a more experienced team than Florida State, and they're a more talented team than the Seminoles, at least on offense. They got a better offensive line, a better, more proven group of wide receivers. It doesn't matter how well Florida State has recruited because they're not recruiting at an insanely high level. At least they have in the last couple of years. They brought in a few good recruiting classes here or there, but Virginia Tech, with them not recruiting as high as a level as what Florida State has, the last couple of years, what have they been doing? They've been developing their 3-star, maybe a few 4-star players and turning those guys into really good players. And that's why seasons like Brent Pry going into year 3 are so big. And that's when you see these programs make big jumps and have big Cinderella years, because they have guys who haven't been as highly recruited as teams that have all these 4- and 5-star guys like Florida State and Miami, but they've been well developed by a very good coaching staff. And that's why I could see Virginia Tech making it into the CFP this year. Now, if that happens, they're possibly going to have to win the ACC unless they only have one loss because their schedule is fairly weak. But I could see a path where we see Virginia Tech getting into the college football playoffs this year because they are good enough to win the ACC this season. They got a lot of experience. They got great depth at every single position. Their defense only got better up front. And Brent Pry is resurrecting Virginia Tech football. Like the last time the Hokies were good, I remember I was watching them play against Boise State early in the season when I was like 10 or 11 years old. It's been a while since Virginia Tech has received the amount of attention that they've been getting this offseason from a national standpoint. If you could end up being undefeated when you host Clemson late in Plattsburgh, you mean to tell me that they couldn't win that game? Clemson isn't really that good as compared to what Virginia Tech could be this season. I think the ceiling for Clemson is pretty clear. 10, 11 wins at best. They get to the ACC championship. I think they're going to lose it to Miami, or if they do have to play Virginia Tech or FSU. I think that Virginia Tech, to me, is clearly the second best team in the ACC this year based on what they have coming back, the talent that they have in that squad, being developed by a really good coaching staff. Not only that, but their schedule is favorable. I like Virginia Tech to be able to beat a FSU and the Clemson if they end up making it to the ACC championship over Miami. Hell, I could see them taking down my Hurricanes. I really believe that this year in college football is going to be really chaotic. We're going to have a bunch of teams that we've overlooked in the past end up resurrecting themselves and putting themselves in the forefront of getting into this new expanded playoffs. And we're going to have teams that, you know, we've hyped up based on what they did last year for the last 2 seasons, like Mizzou and FSU, that are going to disappoint. There's going to be a few teams like Virginia Tech that get into this thing. If you're looking to bet some money on a dark horse playoff contender, a team that has very low chances of getting in, that could win you a lot of money if you end up taking their odds, Virginia Tech is definitely that team. Very often do we have teams like Virginia Tech that return this amount of experience, having a promising head coach going into year 3 that fail to live up to expectation. I would love to see Virginia Tech in the college football playoffs this year, and everybody's naming their dark horse college football playoff contenders. I had it at Colorado at first, but everybody seems to laugh at that one. People want me to be more realistic, even though I'm dead serious about Colorado getting into the playoffs this year. If I had to give you a dark horse playoff contender that more people probably will see as a true dark horse, I gotta go with VT. This is it for this episode of the JT Sports Podcast, or JT Sports Live. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. If you enjoyed, leave a like, subscribe to the channel. Remember that we're not just a YouTube channel. We are a podcast. You can find this episode and all of our previous ones in audio format on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast from. The JT Sports Podcast is available. Give us a 5-star review if you enjoy. Follow us on X if you're not watching live at JT Sports __ and on Instagram at JT Sports __. Shout out to everybody in the comment section, man. Shout out to everybody that's tuned in on X, YouTube, wherever you're watching. I appreciate you guys for spending part of your